On the Kola Peninsula, behind rust, snow, and a metal cap no wider than a dinner plate, the Soviet Union once opened the deepest door on Earth. It did not look like a doorway. It looked like plumbing bolted into concrete. But below it, the planet disappeared for over 12 kilometers. This was not a mine, and it was not a tunnel. No one would ever climb down it. The Kola Superdeep Borehole was made for knowledge alone. The site stood in the far northwest of the Soviet Union, near Norway, in a landscape of nickel towns, polar wind, and exhausted industrial light. Inside the control rooms, the dream was absurdly simple. Drill through the crust, read the planet directly, and prove that Soviet science could go deeper than anyone. The deeper the project went, the smaller human ambition began to look. Paper, steel, and ideology were being lowered into a world that had never known them. Every core sample was a message from an older Earth. Some pieces had waited billions of years before a human hand lifted them into lamplight. The target was not treasure. It was the boundary beneath the crust, the mysterious Mohorovicic discontinuity where familiar rock was expected to give way. To reach it, engineers turned an oilfield problem into a planetary experiment. The borehole would be narrow, vertical, and relentless. Outside, the drilling tower glowed through snow like a lighthouse for the underworld. Inside, pipes turned, mud circulated, and the numbers kept falling. Every shift had the same rhythm. Measure, lower, listen, wait. The planet did not answer in words, only pressure, heat, fracture, and silence. The Kola project was born in the same age as moonshots and nuclear submarines, when even the Earth's interior became a Cold War frontier. America had tried first at sea, with Project Mohole, drilling through ocean floor toward the mantle. It proved the idea, then collapsed under cost and politics. The Soviets chose land instead. Not glamorous land, but ancient shield rock near the Arctic Circle, where the crust was old, stable, and scientifically tempting. Maps turned the Kola Peninsula into a target. Beneath the snow and smelter smoke lay Precambrian rock, a deep archive older than complex life. In 1970, equipment began arriving. The project had a plain name, SG-3, but its ambition belonged to the heroic engineering age. Building the site meant fighting the surface before touching the depths. Roads, housing, power, laboratories, and drilling floors had to exist in freezing isolation. The first enemy was not heat or pressure. It was remoteness. Every bolt, pipe, gauge, and replacement part had to survive the Arctic as well as the rock. The drill bit was only the visible tip of a much larger machine. Pumps, mud, cables, sensors, and laboratories all had to act as one body. Drilling mud carried cuttings upward, cooled the bit, and kept the deep hole alive. Without that moving fluid, the experiment would seize in darkness. Core samples were logged with almost religious care. Each cylinder of rock became evidence, a small solid witness from a place no human eye could visit. At first, progress felt like conquest. Kilometer by kilometer, the hole extended downward, and the charts made the impossible look administrative. By 1979, Kola had broken the world depth record. The race underground had become less symbolic and more genuinely strange. The wider world saw only numbers. The scientists saw a rare instrument, a vertical observatory drilled into the deep crust of the Earth. The first rig was adapted from oilfield work, but Kola soon demanded more. Ordinary drilling technology was being asked to behave like a spacecraft. Unlike a mine shaft, this opening was only centimeters wide. The whole voyage depended on tools lowered, blind, through a narrow column of hostile rock. At these depths, even small vibrations mattered. Pipes stretched, twisted, and remembered every meter of descent like a steel nervous system. The mud returned carrying heat, ground rock, and hints of chemistry. Sometimes the surface looked less like a drilling site and more like a laboratory wound. The men who worked there lived between factory and frontier. They were not descending into danger, but they were sending machines where machines barely belonged. Long-form projects are built from waiting. For every dramatic record, there were hundreds of slow nights, cold meals, and instruments watched in silence. In 1974, a larger purpose-built rig arrived. Its name carried the dream openly, Eurolmash 15,000, because 15 kilometers was the promise. The new derrick made the project feel imperial again. Steel rose above tundra, while beneath it, the borehole narrowed into a private war with physics. Tools went down like offerings. They returned scratched, heated, warped, or sometimes not at all. The hole accepted equipment without explanation. The core library grew into a strange archive. Shelves filled with rock from depth that had once existed only as calculations and seismic guesses. Under microscopes, the familiar crust became unfamiliar. Mineral boundaries, fractures, and textures refused to match the clean diagrams printed in textbooks. The paper system around Kola became immense. Logs, cores, magnetic tapes, and measurements accumulated as if bureaucracy could pin the deep earth in place. By the early 1980s, Kola was deeper than Everest is tall above sea level. Yet it had barely scratched the planet's outer shell. The old model imagined layers behaving neatly. Kola found complexity instead, with fractures, unexpected transitions, and rocks altered by pressure, water, and time. One surprise was microscopic fossils reported from extraordinary depth. Life had left faint traces far below where most people imagined life's history could reach. Another surprise was water. Not an underground ocean, but water locked in fractured minerals, forced from rock by pressure, chemistry, and immense geological time. The returning mud sometimes carried unusual gas. To the scientists, these were not legends, but clues that the deep crust was chemically restless. The deeper the borehole went, the less the earth resembled a dead solid block. It behaved like memory under pressure, cracked and reactive. Some rocks were more than 2 billion years old. In a lab tray, they looked ordinary, which made their age almost impossible to feel. Predictions began to fail. The crust was harder, wetter, and stranger than expected. The borehole was not confirming the map. It was rewriting it. Long instruments went down on numbered cables, kilometer after kilometer, taking the planet's temperature and reading its rock directly. Every new measurement widened the gap between theory and contact. Seismic shadows became real rock, and real rock refused to stay simple. Compared with ocean trenches, Kola felt almost mythic. The Mariana Trench is deeper as a place, but Kola was deeper into the planet itself. Outside the buildings, dawn kept returning with no sense of occasion. Human records changed below ground, while the tundra remained indifferent. The project attracted visitors, officials, and scientists. For a moment, the borehole became a monument not to extraction, but to pure investigation. Then the Earth began collecting its price. In 1984, a section of drill string twisted off deep underground and was lost. 5 kilometers of steel remained below, unreachable in any practical sense. Kola had made a mistake at a scale only super deep drilling could produce. The solution was not recovery, but deviation. Engineers branched from higher in the borehole and tried again, drilling around their own buried failure. This is the hidden cruelty of deep drilling. A problem several kilometers down cannot be touched. It can only be inferred, compensated for, or abandoned. The site began to collect its own casualties. Worn bits and retired tools gathered outside the workshops, a quiet museum of everything the hole had refused. As the project continued, temperature became the real antagonist. At depth, the rock was far harder than early models had expected. The instruments still worked, but every operation became more fragile. Heat changed mud behavior, softened assumptions, and punished the metal sent below. In 1989, Kola reached 12,262 meters. It remains one of the deepest artificial points ever reached by humankind. The plan still pointed deeper, 13.5 kilometers first, then 15. The charts kept their optimism longer than the machinery could, but near 180 degrees Celsius, the bottom of the hole became too difficult. The rock behaved less like stone and more like resistance. Water dripped through the aging site above, while heat rose invisibly from below. The project was being attacked by both climate and geology. At extreme depth, the rock did not need to melt to win. It only had to deform, fracture, and make precision impossible. The drill pipes told the story physically. Bent, worn, and overheated, they showed that the limiting factor was no longer ambition, but material reality. Then came the other pressure, money. By the early 1990s, the Soviet system around Kola was cracking faster than the crust beneath it. The Soviet Union collapsed, and with it, the world that had made Kola plausible. Grand scientific endurance no longer had the same political oxygen. Institutes shrank, salaries failed. Projects that once symbolized national destiny became liabilities, waiting for budgets that no longer arrived. In the surrounding towns, the end of the Cold War felt physical. Apartment blocks, factories, and research buildings all carried the same slow retreat. Drilling effectively stopped in the 1990s. The borehole remained, but its future narrowed from exploration to maintenance, study, and eventual abandonment. Equipment was stripped or transferred. The mighty apparatus that had once reached toward the mantle became scrap, inventory, and silent industrial memory. The cores survived more gracefully than the machinery. Box by box, they preserved the real achievement, not the depth alone, but the evidence. At Kola, failure is the wrong word. The project never reached the mantle, but it destroyed simple ideas about the crust on the way. And the site became the opposite of a monument. No triumphal plaza, no polished museum entrance. Just ruin, snow, rust, and a capped hole. A locked gate now explains more than any slogan. The future that built Kola ended, and the earth kept everything it had not allowed. In abandoned laboratories, the silence feels almost geological. The machines are gone, but the questions remain exactly where the Soviets left them. By the late 2000s, the site was effectively abandoned. What remained was not a working frontier, but a ruin around a record. Today, the deepest doorway on Earth is sealed by a small rusting cap. It is comically modest for something that outlived an empire. Visitors who find it often expect spectacle. Instead, they find concrete, bolts, and the unsettling fact that depth does not need to look dramatic. Nearby towns still carry the industrial afterlife of the region. Smelters, snow, and empty spaces frame the borehole better than any heroic statue could. In museums and archives, the core samples are quieter than legends. They do not scream from hell. They simply prove the Earth was stranger. The popular myth called it the well to hell. The real story is colder and better. Scientists listened, and the planet refused their timetable. Even 12 kilometers down, humanity barely entered the crust. The mantle remained distant, and the Earth remained almost entirely untouched. That is the haunting scale of Kola. The deepest wound we ever made in the planet is, to the planet, hardly a scratch. So the cap stays shut in the Arctic wind. Exploration is not always upward or visible. Sometimes it is a narrow line into darkness, paid for impatience. Beneath the cap, the record continues downward, into heat, pressure, and a silence older than life.